I think that's probably a good point where I will bring in Sophie and Gemma. Please do keep putting your questions in the chat. We'll come back to some of them in a few minutes. I did notice we got somebody from Canada on the call as well, which is exciting to go international with Foundations Live. So thank you for now, Savannah. We'll bring you back at the end for the questions. But now I'll hand over to Sophie and Gemma, who have got an example from a little bit closer to home. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Hi everyone, my name's Sophie. I'm a consultant at Innovation Unit, and I'm delighted to be here with Gemma Parlby from Salix Homes to tell you a bit about a project that Gemma and I have worked on together called Homes to Live Well, which is really exploring the role of social housing providers in sort of preventative systems and public services and supporting social connection in place. Gemma, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
I'm Gemma Parlby, Exec Director of Customer and Landlord Services at Salix Homes, and previously with another Greater Manchester housing provider, Bolton at Home. Great, okay, so GMHP, that's Greater Manchester Housing Providers. So we're a partnership, a really strong partnership of 27 housing providers across the Manchester City region and 10 local authorities surrounding Manchester City. We manage around 260,000 homes. That's about 1 in 4 of homes are managed by the partnership, and we contribute approximately 1.2 billion to the regional economy every year. So the partnership works collaboratively in a number of ways. We have formal joint ventures such as our Hive Homes product, which is where we build and sell homes, new homes on the open market. We have commission delivery between the providers, such as our Greater Manchester Housing First programme, a homelessness programme. We have lots of collective engagement with policymakers around consumer standards and supported housing more recently. And we generally work together to share best practice. So whilst we're quite different and unique, the 27 of us, we all look a little bit different, and in various parts of the boroughs, we do work very collaboratively together, and we're not precious. So I'm currently sat in Salford, and I have colleagues in For Housing who are also social housing providers in Salford. We don't fight over bits of land or boundaries. We very much work together and in partnership. That's just a bit about GMHP.
Thanks so much, Gemma. A bit about Innovation Unit and about Live Well, which I'd like to tell you about kind of the foundation of this work. So Sav and I both work at Innovation Unit. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise working across lots of different parts of the public sector, from housing to combined authorities to justice to mental health. And over the last couple of years, we've been working really closely with Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and we've been their strategic partner with a role in thinking about how to scale this movement called Live Well. And Live Well is Greater Manchester's sort of commitment to great everyday support in every neighbourhood across the city region to support everyone to live well in their place, sort of at every stage of life. So really it's sort of a movement which is it's Greater Manchester's commitment to prevention, thinking about how to shift sort of the city region system to be really preventative and people focused, and shifting away from sort of a focus on acute services and crisis. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see what we kind of call the Live Well framework. This sort of tells us what Live Well kind of means in practice. You'll see at the sort of top of the framework that Live Well is always sort of community-led, and that's the sort of foundation of Greater Manchester's understanding of what prevention should look like in practice. And that means sort of grounding preventative work in community action, community power, and community wealth. But as you'll see on sort of the bottom half of this framework, there's also an acknowledgement that community-led practice can only thrive when it is enabled by the system. And that means that the Greater Manchester system is sort of committed to starting to work collaboratively, sharing leadership, accountability, purpose, and power. And we then had the sort of pleasure of working with Gemma and colleagues at Greater Manchester Housing Providers Network on this project, which we've called Homes to Live Well. And the piece of work that we sort of set out to do together was to focus in on the role of social housing providers in delivering Live Well across Greater Manchester and sort of contributing towards this shift to prevention. And also articulating how housing providers sort of wanted to grow that and their ambitions for future contribution to Live Well. It was important to sort of start this work by thinking through what housing providers' existing contribution is to Live Well, because we know what a vital role they are already playing in bringing this movement to life and always have played. We know that social housing providers are often anchor institutions in local places. They work where home, health and community meet, and they combine local presence and local knowledge with the opportunity for Greater Manchester-wide learning and scale through the Greater Manchester Housing Providers Network. And this was really thinking through how social housing providers not only build safe homes and are excellent landlords across Greater Manchester, but actually their community engagement work is really a crucial part of the sort of community-led practice across Greater Manchester. So we worked together to sort of produce an output that demonstrated the current contribution that social housing providers are making to Live Well, and sort of outline the ambitions for growing that contribution, to sort of develop an invitation for cross-sector partners across the system to work collaboratively with housing providers in place and to align investment around Live Well. The first thing that we did in this piece of work together was to surface some really brilliant examples of how housing providers are already supporting and growing Live Well. And Gemma, I'll hand over to you to take us through a couple of those examples. Thanks, Gemma. As Gemma said, we supported colleagues across Greater Manchester housing providers to go out and have conversations with practitioners and leaders across Greater Manchester, and we have a whole host of examples in our output. But from these sort of local examples, we were able to draw out some sort of key learning that tells us about how housing providers are contributing sort of actively to the Live Well movement in Greater Manchester, and sort of what kind of practice or ways of working that takes. And we sort of distilled these into 4 themes. First, we learned how brilliant housing providers are at connecting around a shared purpose locally, bringing partners together around what matters most to their residents and to their customers. And Manbasters and the Manbasters movement, I think, is a brilliant example of this, and connecting in local businesses as well as statutory services around something that mattered locally to residents. Secondly, we learnt lots about how housing providers lead collaboratively by sort of having a hosting role rather than a directing role, creating sort of the space for partners to collaborate and sort of keep people connected, while also empowering others to take leadership in the spaces that they want to. The Ageing in Place Pathfinder work that Gemma sort of spoke through, I think, is also a wonderful example of this, and sort of supporting residents and resident groups into that sort of leadership role to develop those local action plans. And whilst it was a Pathfinder programme from the CA, housing providers really supported residents to make those unique and place-based. Thirdly, we learned around how housing providers are building collective accountability when working in partnership with organisations across the sector. And we learned about how providers are sharing insights, sharing their local knowledge with other services, sort of reviewing process together and sharing best practice. And that final example that Gemma shared, that Project 500, around embedding social value in every contract in that project and sharing best practice of ways to do that, and ensuring that residents' voice is in what good social value looks like to them is at the heart of that work. And finally, we learn about how it is that housing providers are growing community power and supporting community-led work to flourish. We know that housing providers, through the community engagement work that they do, make it easy for residents to get involved. They offer sort of resources, space and support, as well as routes into sort of local decision-making and action. Gemma, I'll pass back to you again to chat about the output that we created at the end of this work.
Okay, thanks. So we developed a toolkit. And really, the reason we wanted to create this toolkit was to, one, demonstrate the work that Greater Manchester housing providers do in the place, and how we work with residents and partners to achieve improved outcomes. To us, that's obvious. We've done it for years. We've always done it. But when we talk to people in the wider system, often people didn't know. And I think sometimes they still don't know, and they're quite surprised about some of the projects and the work that we do. We're quite quiet doers in social housing. We just get on with the job, and when other agencies or other partners are not able to deliver, we tend to step in, and then from small acorns, big oak trees grow. So we really wanted almost to celebrate really what it is we do, how we work in partnership, and how it really doesn't matter whether you're working with Salix in Salford or Bolton at Home in Bolton, you're going to get a very similar kind of approach, a very similar value set in those communities. And we wanted to use the toolkit to really enable conversations with the wider system to say, whichever neighbourhood you're working in, go and speak to your social housing provider. And if we're the smaller one, then we'll direct you to Great Places or to Irwell Valley or to the key anchor organisation in that area. So we wanted to use it to celebrate what we did, also to connect with the wider system, because we're very well aware that there are still gaps in service delivery. There's duplication because everyone is trying to do the right thing but don't know what everybody else is perhaps doing. So the toolkit does also come with a kind of a mapping exercise that we're currently on with now, that really shows what projects, what social value, what is happening across Greater Manchester. So really, we wanted this toolkit to be able to go along to the wider system to say, look, this is our offer. How do we connect in? How do you connect with us? And how do we make the most of our resources together as a system? And as we're in 10 different local authorities, we are in the process now of really making those connections with each of those Live Well leads in the local authorities. And it's happening in different ways in different places, as you'd probably imagine. So where we have stock transfer organisations that sit very much part of the council, they're rocking on ahead and they're embedded in Live Well, and they are really connected into the system. In other areas, it's slightly more difficult, and we're still having those conversations around what is our offer. So there's still loads more work to do, and the next steps really are to identify key leads and to connect them up and have those honest conversations about what we can do, also what we can't, or what others might be best placed to do. But I think the toolkit gives us a really helpful starting point when we're having those conversations in the system.
Thanks, Gemma. The final thing that I just wanted to say about this piece of work was kind of the approach that we took, why it was effective in sort of creating the toolkit that we produced. This approach was sort of designed in partnership with GMHP, and I think there's 3 elements to the approach that we took to this work that made it really effective. The first was sort of grounding the work in an appreciative inquiry approach. This was kind of just the approach that we took when we were trying to surface those different examples of excellent practice and those case studies of work that housing providers are already doing across the Greater Manchester system. And as Gemma sort of said, this was a real strengths-based approach, and it was celebrating the work that already exists in the system and really telling that story to other agencies across the system. It also helped us sort of create a brilliant bank of best practice on which we were able to then sort of say, okay, where does GMHP want to take this ambition next, and how do we want to grow this contribution across the system? Secondly, we had a real focus on tackling inequity. As we were setting up the sort of appreciative inquiry approach, we had to think about a bit of a criteria and think about, what does best practice look like in terms of Live Well. The Live Well framework offers us some ideas, but actually we had to really think about, we want to surface examples of work that is actively aiming to undo harm, is sort of raising the voices of marginalised groups of residents, and is trying to tackle systemic inequity within systems. Finally, we had to work systemically in this piece of work. At Innovation Unit, we often use systems change frameworks in our work, and this was really about thinking about Live Well as a huge systems change piece, and sort of thinking about GMHP as a huge influencer in the system. And to really focus on the sort of systems change element of this, we thought about kind of both the cultures, so the sort of mindsets and the assumptions that we bring into work, as well as the sort of more structural and process sort of factors that can be both barriers and enablers to shifting a system. And we sort of thought about that starting at a real local level through all the different examples that we surfaced at the very beginning of this work. And then, as Gemma said, we started to think about, what does this mean for housing providers' contributions to Live Well at a borough level? So how might it look different for different local authorities across the 10 in Greater Manchester? And finally, we were able to surface that learning at a regional level. What does this mean for Greater Manchester housing providers as a regional network, and the role that they want to play in Live Well moving forwards as the movement grows? So I'll stop there. Thank you so much, and Gemma and I are happy to take any questions.
Can I come in there, Sophie? I think it was largely the strength and the maturity of that partnership with the Greater Manchester housing providers. So it's been a partnership for quite a number of years now, and as I explained earlier on, we collaborate in a lot of different ways. But I think it's about not being precious about, this is my boundary, this is what I do, this is what I can give. I think it's really honest conversations around what we're strong at, what we're not so good at, where we need to join up. And in that sharing of best practice. So if somebody's got a really good floating support model and they've managed to negotiate that through the housing benefit system in a certain area, let's share that and do that together. And we find that we have a really strong voice as a partnership of 27. So we are often asked for our opinion, and when we do, consultations back to government, we will do our individual responses, but we'll do a collective response, so we have a really strong voice. So I think it's around the maturity and honesty of partnerships and the willingness of people to come to the table to say, well, I'll take a back seat there and you do that because we're not precious. I think that's there's lots of other things as well, but I think that was the bedrock.
Great. Thank you both.